So Jamie Gear, welcome to the Traipsin Global on Wheels podcast hour. I'm going to read your bio for people who are not as familiar with your background. So Jamie Gear is a passionate human rights lawyer who's spent over 2 decades fighting for the rights of women, girls, gender diverse people, and marginalized communities worldwide. She's worked with the UN and major NGOs like Amnesty International and the Global Justice Center. Jamie also consults on workplace inclusivity and equality while advocating for LGBTIQ+, reproductive, gender, and disability justice. She runs a boutique law practice helping individuals and couples with family formation, including adoption and surrogacy. Jamie holds an LLM from American University and a JD from the University of San Francisco. Jamie, is there anything else you want to add to our bio?
Started thinking I was going to, advocate for women's rights exclusively, but as I came of age myself and started to see more, structural levels of discrimination, intersectional types of discrimination, my passion has definitely expanded to really try and uplift all people who are facing structural exclusion and discrimination and stigma and stereotyping in the world. So it started from a young age, and it's proliferated over the years, and I couldn't enjoy what I do more. Really.
And I love the quote behind you, in a world where you can be anything, be kind.
That's something I have to say every day to my children. If I can do anything, I want to create kind to new humans in the world.
Yeah. So next question, can you share a pivotal moment from your two decades in international human rights advocacy that significantly impacted your perspective?
I have, over the years, worked on what some would say are controversial issues. And I think that a through line of this type of work that impacts me every day is always making sure that I work with people directly who are most affected by the issues I'm thinking about and working on and litigating around. And one of those moments that, I continue to learn this lesson again and again, but one of those moments took place when I was working at Amnesty International, and we were working to adopt an institutional position on sex work. And, this is quite a contentious issue for many, and even many within the women's rights movement, feminist movements, and the human rights movement. And I would have these moments where I would waver because of backlash around this. But it was when you talk to the individuals and the rights holders that you are working to advance rights on behalf of directly, and you work and understand their lived realities, it would keep me centered. And I was able to sort of quiet the noise of opposition. And I think as I move through my career, I continue to be reminded of that even when you're working on issues that people deem controversial, you are doing the right thing if you're trying to give dignity and recognition of the reality of the person you're advocating on behalf of. So that's definitely, as I said, a through line of my career, and working towards something like adopting this institutional position, which received a ton of pushback around the world, shaped my work going forward. And I continue to have moments like that. I continue to work on issues that cause a lot of, outrage in media and pushback from all different types of people. But I remain steadfast in the belief in human rights recognition of all people from all walks of life. So I continue to stay the course.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it's so important to have people like you who's willing to do that, because I think there could definitely be more people like you in the world. I think my personal experience too, being a wheelchair user who, was diagnosed with polio and scoliosis, and being different in any given environment I enter, I can not only professionally but personally understand and feel the importance of everything that you do. So another reflective question, when thinking back, who do you think are the mentors or figures you have most influenced your own journey and the way that you contribute to society?
I have a few. I can respond with that. A predominant figure in my life was my grandmother. She had a very little education, came from a lower income background, didn't advance past 8th grade in school. but had this worldliness to her and a fundamental humility about herself that as I watched her, as I grew, I started to realize that she was one of my champions and one of my mentors, and that I always seek to remain humble like my grandmother, and that it reminds me that it's not a matter of how much education you have, how successful you are, what items you've accumulated in your life, but how you treat other people and the respect with which you give other people. So she was a formidable figure in my life. I also have had various mentors in terms of colleagues in higher education that allowed me into spaces and rooms which gave me privilege in terms of it's very complicated and complex to get into a human rights career, and it took a lot of time and dedication, but I have a few people in my life that have given me access to those coveted spaces that I'm so grateful for, and I continue to learn from these academics in terms of how to think about things, how to push further, and how to continue to reach back and provide similar opportunities as I grow in my own career. So I'm always the type of person that if someone reaches out to me and asks for an informational interview or asks for some guidance or help, I'm absolutely always say yes, even if I don't have the time, because people like that gave me opportunities, and I owe it to pay that back or pay that forward in many ways. And then a third, I would say, grouping of people who are mentors are global South-based feminist advocates working in extremely complex contexts that remind me that, again, to remain humble, to stand in the back of the type of work that I do, to make sure that these types of advocates are in the front line, that their voices are being heard, because they are engaging in much more thought-provoking, cutting-edge work than I will ever be able to comprehend. So again, people in my life that help me stay centered in this line of work and inspired, people who commit their whole lives in very precarious circumstances, human rights defenders, I would say continue to be a role model for me.
Yeah. It sounds like you've had some great influencers. Your grandma.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've heard a couple people say their grandmas. It seems like grandmas have played a really significant role in people's lives.
They do. I think it's a generational connection between a young person and an older person, that and wisdom gets passed in a way that parents are either too busy to or not focused on. And grandparents can really play a big role.
Yeah. So now that we've gotten to know you a little bit in your journey in terms of who has impacted you, I want to hear a little bit about your experience. I know you've worked with the United Nations. How has that influenced your approach to human rights litigations and advocacy?
We had a really unique opportunity to work at two UN agencies. I worked with the World Health Organization and UNAIDS, the joint program in the UN that addresses HIV prevention, treatment, and care and support. And I started to realize, what it meant to work internally to a multilateral institution, which is massive, such as the UN, and the constraints with which you are working within. And it actually, I think, made me become a better advocate. When I exited the UN and returned to civil society, I had a much more strategic thinking and an approach of what levers an NGO can pull and what support colleagues within UN agencies and technical bodies, what type of support they need, and what you need to provide in terms of helping them move internal levers. It's extremely important to have internal champions within the UN, but it's also that the NGO civil society sector plays a huge role in moving that work forward. So I think having that internal experience was amazing in that I was given a perspective I might not have otherwise understood. And I think I became a better advocate afterwards in terms of, finding those internal champions and figuring out where NGO resources and expertise can really, really grease the wheels a bit in an institution that can work notoriously slow, have a lot of political barriers. And I think this is now even more the case that multilateral institutions such as the UN are under attack. And, there's efforts to weaken these institutions, which is highly problematic in this global world for sure.
Yeah. It sounds like it was really key to the skills and some of the progress you want to make in this area. Can someone, without going into a big institution like the UN, learn it in any other way? Learn the lessons that you learned?
I mean, I think that was a really unique opportunity, but there's a whole pool of lifetime UN advocates that have this collective expertise that have gained it over the years that I think that are quite generous with sharing their experience and their insight and knowledge. And I do think it is a very particularized knowledge about what it means to advocate and shape international legal norms around the world. And sometimes you're just spending years and months focused on one word in a document, but appreciating the strength of including that one word in a document. And these are the nuances of this type of advocacy that I think the everyday person wouldn't realize and wouldn't quite understand the value of that work. But it is really this incremental step by step motion and movement over the years that has, I would say, advanced human rights in the realms of gender, sexuality, reproduction, health. It's this cadre of committed advocates that have stayed the course and show up even when the very institutions we're working within and before are under attack.
Yeah. Maybe the next question will help people understand the value and the nuance. Can you share a story where your advocacy really helped shifted a community's perspective?
I've done advocacy in recent years at the intersection of disability and sexual and reproductive rights. And some of the more complicated work when you're doing human rights movement work is really trying to bridge the divides between movements. And I mean, all too often as part of for the course that like movements can move in silos and you can start to see that sometimes work over here, while it is human rights work, is acting in or resulting in exclusion or to the detriment of the human rights realization of another group. So it's like the importance of both intersectional analysis, but cross movement collaboration is huge. And this work that I have done at the intersection of disability and sexual and reproductive rights is along those lines of where we were trying to see how can we bring together the disability rights movement and the sexual and reproductive rights movement in a way that uplifts both women's rights writ large, sexual and reproductive rights writ large, and accounts for the particular experiences of women and girls and gender diverse persons with disabilities. And this issue really has come to, some of the friction points has been around the issue of abortion, and where some disability rights advocates, some anti-choice advocates have come together and really made the argument that when you permit abortion in cases of fetal diagnoses or fetal anomalies, genetic anomalies, that you're engaging in disability discrimination. And so while you go down that line of advocacy, you start to see that then anti-choice advocates have jumped onto that and led to greater restrictions on abortion for women and girls broadly. At the same time, when sexual and reproductive rights advocates have advocated for broad access to abortion for all who need it without restriction, that has also often can work to the detriment of persons with disabilities. It has done nothing to talk about the lack of wholesale access to sexual and reproductive health services for persons with disabilities. It does little to address the fact that people are being denied of their legal capacity with regard to their own bodies and sexualities and reproduction. And that if we continue along that line and don't account for that there is a sense of what some feel may be eugenics, or some feel that, allowing this is somehow leading to stigmatizing views of persons with disabilities and the potential elimination of persons with disabilities. If you don't acknowledge that and confront that, then you're doing a disservice to the disability rights community. So what I've been doing in collaboration, obviously, with a lot of advocates is like, where can these two movements come together and come to a shared platform around these issues, and how can we bolster everyone's sexual and reproductive rights, including people with disabilities. And that is not easy work. That is exhausting work. That is work that, there's tense conversations, but I would say it's some of the most important work, because the more we are divided as human rights advocates, the weaker we are. And that, it's hard to get funding for this type of, movement building and making and cross movement discussion, but it's so important. Like in the long run, developing platforms for advocacy that are not exclusionary, the more progress we're going to make.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for going in depth and explaining all of that. And we're going to do a little bit more about that in the next section when talking about challenges and misconceptions. So, what misconceptions do you believe exist at the intersection of disability and sexuality? And how can, society right now better address them? I know that's a loaded question, and I didn't even confine it to a specific region.
That's a huge question. We could write a thesis on that.
We really could.
I mean, I think there's just wholesale assumptions that persons with disabilities aren't sexual, or asexual, don't need to be taught about, you don't need to be given access to comprehensive sexuality education, don't need to be concerned with sexual and reproductive health care. Some persons with disabilities are sterilized without their consent, like really tragic things happen, and just denied agency and legal capacity around their bodies and their sexualities. And that when you have this assumption about a massive percentage of the global population, it's a lot of people that we're just wholesale assuming do not have sexual lives, do not have sexual desires, do not want to create families, or they're, even if they want to, they're denied the ability to. I think that is a huge issue that I think the human rights movement writ large, but also the sexual and reproductive rights movement hasn't really grappled with. And that, are you actually doing sufficiently strong sexual and reproductive rights work if you're not confronting that huge issue that's leaving a ton of people out, and whose rights are being violated all the time? So I think that's one issue. I think that misconceptions around the capacity in general of persons with disabilities, advocates with disabilities, the lack of true inclusion and accommodation to pull persons with disabilities into our movements is another huge issue. I mean, there's so much work that needs to be done in terms of integrating disability rights as a core fundamental human rights issue across movements that it's not happening. So I see like chinks in the armor, and you're starting to see some progress, but it's at a glacial pace. It's insufficient. And so I think it's stereotypes about the productivity of persons with disabilities, the lives of persons with disabilities, and sort of lack of humanization. It's highly problematic, and this really holds the work back, and is a dark spot on our movements that we need to rectify.
Yeah. And, a lot of your work is very much emotionally involved, it seems, and emotionally taxing. And so the next question is more of a personal question. How do you sustain your emotional well-being while confronting, some of these very challenging human rights issues and moving things forward? Even, like you said, a lot of it is at a glacial pace.
Yeah, it is difficult, and you have to have a certain stomach, I think, for having the patience and commitment to work that is not going to provide an instant gratification. And I do think about really dark, heavy issues all the time. I've been called a dark cloud. Like my brain is able to sit with really heavy issues. I think about, horrible things a lot of my day. But that is what fuels me as well. It's like, I don't want to sit on this planet and occupy this space and not feel like I'm contributing to making it a better place. And I would say it's my colleagues and friends and loved ones who do this work in the movement that keeps me there. You come across some of the most amazing, committed, lovely people that are in this work, that's 100% keeps me going, and we lift each other up. But I won't say that I have found the answer to to managing it all emotionally. I do think it has impacts, and none of us get sufficient time for ensuring our well-being. So, I mean, that is a constant fight, and I don't have an answer to that. But the people who are in doing the work are what keep me in it.
Having that community and feeling like you're all working together towards a shared mission.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What is your ultimate vision when it comes to gender equality and human rights on a more global scale? And what steps do you think we need to do to get there?
Another big question.
Mhm.
I mean, I primarily focus on issues relating to gender, sexuality, health, and reproductive and disability justice. So I'm sort of in a portion of the human rights movement. And in my ideal world, if I could vision, where we need to be around these issues, it's where we can conceive of all humans as deserving of a dignified existence and all humans who are seen and not scorned, stigmatized, or punished because they're different, or that they're living a different reality, or that they feel different, or that they look different, or that they're engaging in work that other people's don't agree with. It's that we could all see a common humanity. And I continue to focus my work on the most stigmatized, the most criminalized, the most excluded people, because I feel like those are the people that are suffering the most. And they're often suffering on multiple levels. And until we can like lift those people up and see them as deserving of exactly the same as all humans, we haven't achieved our goal yet, but that is my ultimate. That is what I like to vision a world where the most excluded and stigmatized are loved and seen and treated with respect and not punished, not thrown in jail, and not scorned and stigmatized. Like a certain level of humanity for all.
Yeah, as long as we're not hurting anybody, right? It's okay to be
Yeah,
different and live that life as
exactly. And one's existence as being different should not be, accused of harming another. Like someone's difference,
shouldn't be a
shouldn't be
threat.
deemed as like a collective harm against the community.
Yeah,
It's what
yeah,
makes this world amazing and beautiful and different and colorful. And yeah, as long as we're not actually physically, emotionally harming another, then we should be able to set our own path and have the support we need. And I think about this a lot with in terms of accessibility. It's like at a minimum, spaces, work, the public zones, like everything should be accessible because humans are different and have different needs. And how would it feel if everyone felt welcome in a space? And I know that's a little bit rosy colored glasses, but we have to have those glasses to work towards something, to maintain sort of the hope that we can create something different. Like all of this that we've created is socially created. We can do it different.
yeah, yeah. I remember a colleague of mine once when I was living and working in New York City. We were up on the 30 something floor, maybe even higher. And there were all these high rises around us. And he was an older colleague. He's like, you see all this all around? Like, we did this.
Hmm.
And, we have control, basically saying we can impact and influence that environment out there and make it better. And so continuing with uh, that topic, what are some practical, actionable steps organizations can take to foster true inclusivity and accessibility?
I think about accessibility for persons with disabilities within a larger picture of creating workplaces that are inclusive of all, even if you don't self identify as being disabled. Maybe you just work in different ways. Maybe you have family constraints that you can only do things at certain times. Like the more accessible and flexible we can create a work environment helps all of us. And I love the idea of not creating, guidelines around accessibility for an organization or a company that solely focuses on persons with disabilities. Because again, that's a separation. And it's like, no, not distinct. All of us are different. So yes, we need to make sure persons with disabilities are, able to, work in this environment in an accessible way. But let's not stigmatize it. It's not just about that. It's like, what can we do to make this workplace welcoming to all? And we all have different needs. And um, that's a complex task. And it's I think it's willing to be working in a way that you're constantly open to learning and like taking a step. Maybe that didn't work. Maybe that was a misstep. Learning from that, continue to work with an open mind about inclusion and accessibility. And this is like something that's so under attack right now in the United States, and that, anything related to diversity is bad, that we should not be prioritizing things. It's like that is the exactly wrong direction to go in. The more that we can create a community and a workplace that is inclusive of people with differing needs, differing abilities, differing constraints, and the more productive and the more effective we're being. And I don't mean to focus on productivity as the only benchmark of an organization or company. It's more than that. It's like, what is work? It's basically we're coming together to take action, to create livelihoods, and it's not just about a productivity. You're literally, it's part of the community to be creating workplaces. And so the more that we can pull people in and make them places where people can engage equally, equitably, the stronger we are. So I think it's going to you have to have a willingness to learn, a willingness to misstep, a transparency about it, to admit, when things go wrong, and like a commitment to caring about staff and employees, that it's not just the bottom dollar, but a commitment to the people who are actually the employees. The staff are literally the heartbeat of an organization. So prioritizing them, that's who makes it work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Everything you said was so important. And let's move on from organization to like the individual level in terms of what people as individuals can do to contribute to a more inclusive and just world, because it sounds like that's going to be more important than ever before, especially given that our government is, not so supportive of such initiatives right now.
I think a survival strategy at this moment in history is really focusing on local community, um, and well-being, and less on government institutions to do the right thing, but focusing our efforts on, creating inclusive communities, creating surroundings through which we're caretaking to each other. I mean, we need a lot of collective care right now, just emotionally, physically, and dig deep down into like sort of grassroots collective action, grassroots care. That's, as a global human rights advocate, that's a big shift even for me personally. Is okay, what's happening in my local community that I need to lean into? And, engaging with my local school district where my children are, engaging with people who live in my neighborhood, it's actually looking and seeing the people around me and what do they need? And like I'm just cluing in to like human rights advocacy in a different way. And that's my personal endeavor. But what can we do individually? I think that's a very personal thing. One huge thing we need to do is to be introspective about ourselves. Like, what can we individually, as a single person, do? And that's going to take some thinking about, what do we not do now? Like, where are we putting our resources and our time and our commitment? And we're all super busy people, raising children, working, taking care of family, like all different things that occupy time. But we're going to have to like intentionally step back and think about our own lives, and where are we contributing to exclusion? No doubt, no doubt. Where can we individually make a shift? It's going to take a lot, I think, of a lot of internal thinking, and that's just where I am in my journey at the moment. It's not very specific, but it's a realization that I can't just do my work globally. I need to turn myself inward and look around me within 20 feet.
Yeah, well said. I think, when we ourselves change and reflect, everything else we interact with will naturally, automatically change as well. So, last question is a reflective one, which is, what wisdom would you share with young advocates who are passionate but uncertain about their impact that they can make on these social.
Well, first, I would say don't let anyone talk you out of a human rights career or a social justice career. You may not break the bank financially, but the personal gain that that you receive from advocating for others, for being cognizant of discrimination, of being cognizant of the impacts of exclusion, enriches yourself as well. I think humans are made to love, to support, to live in community. And this type of work, while we're not living in, at least where I am, we're not living in a village or communitarian environment anymore, live in a much more individualist society. By nature, I think that humans are created to live differently. And doing this type of work is a nod back to that. And it makes you feel so you also gain. It's like maybe you're not earning a lot of money. It's not a high earning profession, but you gain so much personally and you're literally helping other people. Sometimes you don't know if you're making an impact. And a lot of this is long-term change we're working towards. But there's micro advancements all the time. And the pendulum swings, but I'm firmly convinced that if you are acting from a place of right action, that there is a reverberating impact, even if it's just to the person right next to you, even if it's just like a micro advancement forward, that you are having a positive impact. And you're not doing something that's destructive for the world, which just being on the other side of that is invaluable.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then, of course, we went through all the questions, and I've personally learned so much from you, Jamie. And I know a lot of these questions were big picture questions, and yet managed to answer in a way where I felt like I really resonated with, and I know our listeners as well. And thank you for your generosity with your time and energy
No, of
and coming on.
course. Great. Well, I'm so happy to talk to you, and I'm so happy this podcast exists.
Thank you. I'm so happy you are on. I'm surprised that someone as busy and have done all of this amazing work would want to come on. So I appreciate. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah, I try to say yes as much as possible.